Welcome back to The Things Not Named. I'm Joshua Doležal, and my series this year is titled for a phrase from Willa Cather. Cather famously said that it's the presence of the thing not named that gives high quality to fiction, drama, and poetry. So this year I'm asking that question of medicine. How might we all be more attentive to what goes unsaid in the clinic, in popular culture, and in the experience of illness from the patient's side? My guest today is Kimberly Warner. Kimberly is a filmmaker, author, and patient advocate whose work explores what it means to live fully in a body that doesn't always cooperate. After studying pre med and biology at Colorado College and pursuing graduate training in naturopathic and classical Chinese medicine, Kim left a clinical path for a creative one. In 2015, a rare neurological condition upended her sense of balance. That experience became the seed of Unfixed Media, a multimedia platform for chronic illness storytelling that's been recognized by PBS, Harvard Medical School, and the Invisible Disabilities Association. Kim's debut memoir, Unfixed, was first serialized on Substack, picked up by Empress Editions, and recently earned a publisher's weekly editor's pick and a Kirkus review calling it genre-defying. Kimberly is a member of the Global Advocacy Alliance, the PPAA, Patient and Physician Advocacy Alliance, and a visiting faculty member with Global Genes. She serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Health Design and is also an ambassador for VITA, the Vestibular Disorders Association. So welcome, Kimberly.
So great to be here. I love that you are exploring the white space, the unnamed, and that you're putting that into the realm of clinical care this year. So that's fascinating to me.
Well, it seems appropriate for illness and especially for your story.
Mhm.
So lots of mouthfuls there in your in your bio. You've been really active, it seems, in medical communities as a patient advocate and also as a storyteller.
Yeah, it was not intended. I certainly didn't set out to go that direction. Although I do remember even in high school when I said, I told my parents, I'm going to medical school. And my parents said, well, is that my father was a physician. And they said, do you really want to, work with patients all day? And what's the reality of that? And I said, no, I want to be a high school health teacher. And they're like, well, how are you going to pay off your school loans? And I'm like, I don't know. I'll figure that out. But it's interesting to look, um, you know, 40, 35 years later and see how education has become a really big part of the way that I work with healing. And so a lot of that has come through my own personal struggles and personal insights through living with a body that doesn't always feel great.
Hmm. I got into I mean, it's great that you're using storytelling as a form of advocacy because I think it's underutilized. And we were talking before we went live about narrative medicine and how it began at Columbia University. Rita Sharon founded it, but there's a long tradition of doctors writing, about medical practice and really giving voice to things that can't be said in the examining room or in the operating room. And I first came to this in graduate school. Um, I was learning about deconstruction theory and this idea that all reality is constructed by language. And I kept wondering, well, what about the body? The body has a kind of grammar. The body has a way of making sense of things and finding balance. So it's not all relative, as Derrida and others would say. So I got into medical history and wrote a dissertation on the medical humanities and taught for many years courses like illness and health and literature, where I would love to have featured your book.
Mhm.
So it's nice to be sharing that with folks on Substack this year. But
Yeah.
I want to get back to your memoir, which is the first in this year's series of illness narratives. So I've been mostly interviewing, doctors who are either in the process of writing a memoir or have written memoirs. My conversation last week with Damon Tweedy uh, centered on his second book about mental illness and integrating mental health care into general medicine. So you're the first author of an illness narrative. And before we dive into that, could you just give us a brief synopsis of your book for anyone who hasn't heard of Unfixed or doesn't know anything about it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I've got the little dust jacket summary here, and I can read that to you. And I'll preface it with it's not your classic illness narrative in the sense that it's a weaving of two different types of narratives, though they are both about identity, because anybody that's lived with chronic illness knows that that really can crush our identities. There is, it's not true in the sense that I have a stack of favorite illness narratives here, and a lot of them are just like, this was the diagnosis, and this is the journey with that, and this is the resolution. And mine is a much more complicated, let's say.
Mhm,
But here's
mhm.
the dust jacket summary for those that don't know. Unfixed, a memoir of family mystery and the currents that carry you home, is a haunting exploration of identity, loss, and the unsteady ground of becoming. When a midlife DNA test reveals that the man who raised her isn't her biological father, Kimberly Warner is drawn into two parallel mysteries, one excavating the silence surrounding her beloved father's death, the other tracing the absence of a stranger whose blood shapes her very being. As she unravels the secrets hidden beneath her family's story, another rupture emerges, this time in her body. A mysterious illness takes hold, leaving her adrift in dizziness and a growing awareness that her body knows truths language cannot hold.
Nice. Well, and I've got my copy here, so I'll put a link in the show notes for anyone who wants to order it, but, so you are braiding 2 stories. Why did you not tell them separately?
Because they were completely linked, to the point where I think that the DNA revelation when I turned 40 was very much a catalyst for the disassembly that was happening in my neurology at the same time. I think anyone that's listening that knows about vestibular disorders, especially ones that are neurologically related instead of within the ears, um, can often be heightened or triggered by extreme states of panic. And I was definitely going through a protracted panic attack and a real disorientation to who I was and who I had known myself to be for 40 years. So
Mm,
while I don't think it was a direct link, I think there are a lot of factors that were happening. It was definitely a piece that pulled the rug out from underneath me and quite literally created the sensation of living on water, which is what this mal de debarquement that I have, which that is the actual symptom. The experience of it is living on water.
so you can't really disentangle the illness from your life circumstances, and it's
No.
all part of the same fabric.
Absolutely, and I don't know if that's always the case. I mean, I'm not gonna say that that's, everyone gets an illness because something psychological shifts in their life story, but for me, it did, um, play a huge role, and I think, unfortunately, because of that, I also wasn't diagnosed for 5.5 years, and a lot of that was because of the multifactorial, events that were happening, and so based on which doctor I was seeing to try to figure out why I was so dizzy, they were either looking at the psychological issues and doing trauma and brain spotting and everything under the sun, or concussions on the other end of the spectrum. So it made it very difficult to diagnose what was going on.
Mhm, mhm. Well, you know, all of the people I've interviewed so far are doctors, and in a doctor memoir, doctors write about patients. The patients don't always have the chance to write back, and, your book is coming from the other side of that. When you're going through your diagnostic journey, years of dizziness with no explanation and so on. I'm wondering if you really struggled with other people's stories being projected onto you. I know with neurological conditions, it kind of literally is in your head, right? But there's
Mhm.
a kind of condescending form that takes. Um, so did writing Unfixed feel like you were reclaiming the narrative for yourself instead of being a character in someone else's story?
Yes, and, I'll say that when I started writing this, it was 2018, so this was still pre-diagnosis, but it was also right on the kind of on this precipice of me being so tired of pursuing cures. So I was resting in this place of trying to, like you said, reclaim all of what had just happened to me, including the DNA discovery and the dizziness and all the subsequent things that happened because of that, the loss of job, the loss of friends, nearly the loss of my relationship. And I was trying to just piece it all back together for myself. This was not intended to be something to be read by the world. It was very much just let's get this down on paper, as much as I possibly can so I can remember the details. There's so as you know, when you read this, there's certainly trauma in this, but there was also so much magic and love that was happening throughout this, and that was a really important part that I didn't wanna forget. And so in the writing, I think I was trying to weave those 2 together and maybe find a way for them to coexist, because I knew that what I had been doing, which was just chasing cures and living as if I couldn't be happy unless I was fixed, was not working anymore.
Hmm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the frustrating parts of your condition is that it's invisible. I think you've even used that word,
Mhm.
as some of your advocacy. So, what you excuse me, experience is constant dizziness, this sensation of, like you said, being on water, so you don't look sick, and I don't know if this is true, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're in an operating room, everything has to be kind of reduced to puzzle pieces. So it's the tests, it's the clinical signs, lab results, imaging, and so on. So I'm wondering, in your case, what's lost when a doctor can't
Mm.
see what's happening? They can only see what's measurable. And what did your doctors miss because they were looking for the wrong things or just not able to
Mhm.
see?
Oh gosh. Well, I actually just finished another, illness narrative, and it's called Dizzy, and, of course, I picked it right up because this woman is my age, and we I mean, I had to email her and say, "Are we half siblings?" Because their stories are so similar. She was dizzy for 18 years, and the parallels between her story and all the other vestibular patients that I've talked to around the moment, because there is lab work. There are classic vestibular tests, and you'll get the Epley maneuver for the crystals in your ears. Then you'll go for extensive 2-day lab testing in the vestibular lab, that's designed to stress your vestibular system. But so many of us, especially with the central nervous system disorders, will go back to get the results after this hopeful duration after the test and like, oh my God, they're finally going to figure out what's wrong with me. And the doctor hands you the paperwork and says, congratulations, there's nothing wrong with you. and and that is the most disheartening experience after. And I remember that moment. I'd been living with it. At that point, I think it was 8 months. And I mean, I was going day by day thinking, I can't live another day with this, counting the days to his answer for me. And then for him to pat me on the back and high five and, you're great. I'm like, what they're missing is that we're not. What they're missing is that there is this was a dizzy specialist too, a dizzy neurologist. And, unfortunately, a lot of the central disorders are the last to get diagnosed. So when they're checking the boxes, they're going for he eventually diagnosed me with cervicogenic vertigo, which is structural. He was saying it was in my neck. They want
Hmm.
the quick fixes and they want to be able to medicate. And so, I know there are so many vestibular patients out there that have to go through 20, 40 doctors before they end up getting to the one that's going to address the central issues. And those are, yeah, a little bit more complicated. And it's tricky because it is in your head. And often they are treated with SNRIs and SSRIs, but the patient has to be coached enough to know that the doctor's not saying you're crazy because he's giving you an SSRI or an SNRI. He's not saying this is like, "Oh, you're making this up." He's saying that the world is too much for your brain. Your brain is acting like a scared cat right now, and we need to dim the lights, and we need to
Mm,
turn the volume down. If someone had told me that when they handed me the prescription for diazepam, I would have said, "Yes." Yes, that makes sense. But if they handed the
mm,
diazepam to me and they say, "I think you have too much anxiety." Well, of course I do right now because I can't even walk
mhm,
across the street. So it's
mhm.
it's it's I think a lot of it just comes down to how it's communicated.
Well, I wonder if you might reframe that phrase. It's not in your head, it's in your head and your heart and your nerve. I mean, it's
Yeah.
in your life,
Mhm.
basically. And I wanna ask you about your training because it's a little bit non-traditional. So you train in both Western pre-med, but then
Mhm.
also in classical Chinese medicine before
Mhm.
you turn to the arts. So that's kind of an unusual combo. And in the book, you write about the body knowing truths that language can't hold, which is ironically how I got into medical humanities, right? The body knows
Mhm.
things. It's not all language. So I'm curious how that dual medical training shaped how you think about illness, but then also how you
Mm.
told this particular story.
Oh, well, I instantly thank you. Classical Chinese medicine is fascinating because so much of it lives in metaphor and symbolism, even down to the elements of, categories of illness, and any sort of medicine or herb is either earth, fire, metal, water, air. And it makes me think of, so the way that I experience the dizziness, like I said, is as if I'm on water. In Chinese medicine, there's lots of different ways that they might look at this, but let's look at water simply as a kidney and bladder function, not in the classic organs, as in kidney, bladder, but what they represent, what those organs represent in the universe. And there's a lot there to do with death and grief. And what was happening for me when this experience of being at sea started, I was reliving another big seismic shift in my life around the loss of father. I had lost my adopted father, the one that raised me, who I thought was my real father when I was 18. But then here's this other father that appears through a DNA test, and through some discoveries, he's not available either. So there was something on a cellular level for me that was happening in the realm of grief, and I can't separate the physiology with the metaphor. And I feel like that is a
Mhm.
perfect place where Western and Eastern medicine can come together and can actually be really informative. And the physicians that are able to bridge that, I think, can penetrate a lot deeper into the true experience of what the patient is going through, because we can't separate mind and body. The body certainly does lead the way with symptoms, and I know for myself, my body was leading the way with symptoms. And like I said, heightened anxiety. I had never experienced anything like panic attacks before all of this was happening. What my mind was trying to do was to bring certainty into the experience. And the way I was doing that was by manically asking everyone how I should be experiencing this story. I would just tell strangers about what was happening to me in my life. And what my body was telling me was, this is too much, and you need to slow down and process this information. Have said I even would have done really well had I been sedated, because I was
Mm,
becoming manic with the information. And some gentle sedation so that my nervous system could catch up to the information, this influx of information that was coming into my life that was changing the bedrock of my being, that would have been really, really helpful. So,
Mm.
yes, I think there's a real sweet spot between Western medicine and Eastern medicine that bridges, and it bridges metaphor with physiology.
Well, and part of the Eastern tradition, as I understand it, is ceremony. So there's
Mm.
nothing ceremonious about going to the hospital. It's almost as disembodied, ironically, as it could be. I was speaking last week with Damon Tweedy about, what happens when someone who is uninsured or underinsured goes to the ER looking for help. If they took some pills, there's a cry for help. I'm a danger to myself. Well, if you don't have the resources and you're not in the bourgeois club, then you get escorted in handcuffs to the state hospital. How does that help your mental, spiritual condition? It's like the worst
Wow.
possible ceremony that or ritual that you could undergo.
Yeah.
You're reminding me of one of my favorite novels, Leslie Marmon Silko's Ceremony, which is
I
about
love that book.
a war
It's right here.
veteran. It's a classic. I love teaching it. Yeah, but this half Laguna, half white man comes back from the war, World War II, and he's trying to tell his doctors that he feels like white smoke. And he's narrating his own story in the third person, so he's that detached from himself that he's narrating as if he's outside of his own body, but he sees his body as white smoke. Which is a perfect way of capturing that kind of shell shock or it's not shell shock, it's not PTSD, it's a spiritual illness that he's
Mm,
carrying.
mhm.
It's the image of himself and the Japanese soldiers, the kind of kinship between indigenous people and other
Yep.
Asians that he's seeing and wrestling with, and a pill isn't gonna solve that. 4 white walls in a hospital are not going to be the right environment for that. So it's through, traditional ceremonies that he finds his way back, and he has to kinda sing his way back. He has to find the story. He has to go to the place where uranium is mined to actually complete the ceremony for himself,
Mhm.
and that's
Mm,
just not how Western medicine thinks at all. So
no.
when you're dealing with grief and you go to the hospital, there's no ceremony for grief. It's just sort of
No.
like, well, get over yourself more or
Mm,
less, or here's a pill to sedate you or something.
mhm.
But ceremony activates the body and the spirit traditionally. And I
Mhm.
just don't know that Western medicine has any idea what to do with that.
No, but it's interesting, I'm sure you're familiar with Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, and she says, she thought when she went into medical school and that she'd become a clinician that she could cure everything. And what she realized after years and years of practice is that some things can't be healed, they just need to be held. And I love that so much, and that's, to me, connected to what you're saying around ceremony, because ceremony is a place to hold. And sometimes, and I think narrative medicine does a great job with this too, sometimes the healing is in the holding. It truly is, and I will say that for myself. I'm still dizzy, but I have been tremendously healed on this journey because I feel, while I didn't have physicians that were holding me, I feel like I learned to hold myself in the dizziness. And that is a kind of healing that is lasting. It's a deeper healing. It's a spiritual healing. It's something that is allows me to be able to live with this experience of dizziness and still feel quite peaceful and joyful. Um, is that the role of the doctor? I don't know, but I think that there are physicians out there that are able to recognize that maybe their greatest power isn't in finding the physiological cure, but to still be able to hold the patient.
Mhm. I see, Sean joined in I don't know if you can see the chat here, but he just
I
commented,
can. Mhm.
healing is not always a lack of symptoms. I mean, really,
Mhm.
you have to hurt to heal to some degree. That's true of grief. If you don't
Yeah.
if you don't hurt, your love wasn't real. And the more deeply you love, the more deeply you hurt. And that's something you have to feel. And there's no way to release it except to feel it. And that's not something that there's a lot of patience for in traditional medical contexts either.
Mhm. Yeah, and unfortunately not. My father, the one that I write about in the book, he was a heart surgeon, and I think he really was an unusual heart surgeon in the 80s, because he wanted to access that deeper energetic healing with his patients. His favorite time wasn't when he was cutting them open, it was when he was doing rounds, and he was a big 6'6" physician, but he would kneel down at the patient's bedside and just rest his hands on them. And that was his favorite work. And I remember even as a daughter going around the hospital with him doing his rounds, and it was um, I could tell that there was there was healing happening in just that touch and in just that contact, the wordless contact even. I think some of this
Hmm.
healing really happens beyond words. Um, for me, writing the book was, even though it's a book of words, I think largely the healing is what was happening in between the words. So much so that the last poem in the book is talks mostly about how I am less the words and more the page. And to me, that is often where the real healing comes from.
Hmm.
Kind of like what you were saying at the very beginning about the white space and the unnamed. Maybe the unnamed is really where the healing is coming from.
The thing not named. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, part of what's complicated about your condition is that it's not fixable, really. I mean,
Mhm.
Unfixed is the title of your book. And that it's a little bit unusual in that regard from a typical illness narrative, because an illness narrative usually there's like the inciting incident. It's like an episode of House MD. I know that's an obsolete show now. I'm dating myself by mentioning it. But in a House MD episode, there's somebody in their normal life, and then they have a seizure, and that's the beginning of the illness, and then you have to figure out what the diagnosis is. So there's an onset, there's a kind of crisis that leads to some kind of diagnosis, whether it's satisfactory or not. And then it ends kind of one of two ways. Either you recover or you don't.
Mhm.
Maybe you learn to accept that you'll never recover. In some cases, you die, like Christopher Hitchens in Mortality. That's the end of that illness narrative is his death from cancer. But your book kind of resists that arc. And I hear the title Unfixed as a kind of defiant, I don't know if it's a thesis exactly, but it's a kind of defiant message.
Philosophy,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So I'm wondering if refusing resolution in the book is a craft choice, a philosophical stance, as you're saying, something your
Mhm.
illness forced on you. If you had been cured, would you have written a different book, do you think?
Yeah. This is a life lesson for me, and I can honestly say I'm glad that hadn't been cured because, well, first of all, I love one of the my favorite bits of feedback that I get from people that read this book is they sleep really, really well when they finish. And at first I was like,
Mhm.
"What? Like, is it boring?" And it's there's a nervous system reset is the way it's been communicated, and I think we are needing our culture, our collective is needing more of this nervous system reset. I couldn't have written that nervous system reset had I been cured because then it's just following that nice linear arc of the hero needs to get to the resolution and I finished the one I just mentioned, Dizzy, the memoir, and I was a little bit re-traumatized reading it. And it definitely, and it was fun and it was gripping. And when's she going to get the answer and all of that? But it engaged me physiologically in a way that felt so much more sympathetic. And the way I had to, and the way where I was even when I wrote this book was a deeper settling with
Mm.
and a deeper allowing with the experiences that I was having. And I did not know that when people read that that's what they would be picking up. But it's
Hmm.
really cool to hear that there is kind of like a nervous system reset in people. Finally, they get to let it all go. They get to let down that struggle, that achievement, that self actualization, all of those things that we are trying to achieve, and they get to just be. So it wasn't a choice. I didn't think that that was going to be an experience that my readers would have. I wasn't even writing it for readers, but definitely it has been my experience, and that's lasting. No matter what now happens, even this last month, since I, have had some higher dizzy symptoms, um, I feel just kind of peaceful in the midst of all of it. So I feel like those are some good lessons for all of us right now in our overstimulated population.
Well, that's an interesting effect of the book, and I wonder if you could give us a taste of it. We were talking
Mm,
about there's a chapter that we flagged that we could possibly read a bit of. I think
yeah,
this is the diagnosis, or it's kind of where you understand that there's no cure.
yeah. How much would you like me to read? The chapter 29 is the one that you mentioned, and it's, a couple pages long.
Yeah, why don't we start on page 184, beginning late summer, I finally meet,
Mhm.
and kind of on to the middle of 186, so a couple pages.
Okay. Beginning. My beginning on chapter 29 is reality strikes damning red inks. Ink. Do we have different page numbers?
uh, well, so on 184, the last full paragraph here begins
Oh, late
uh,
summer. Got it. Okay.
late summer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you.
So give us kind of the lead up to this. You're getting kind
Yeah,
of
so this was the dizzy doc that I was mentioning earlier that's eventually diagnosed me with cervicogenic vertigo. So I had been at this point, the early dizziness had started in February, just erratically, and then it was consistently dizzy by May. So May, June, July, August, September. Um, and those months were just hell on earth. I did not know up from down, pulling, constantly being these sensations of being pulled in different directions, like walking in a bouncy castle, the sidewalk dropping out to the point where I didn't leave the house. So I was desperate. Late summer, I finally meet with a neurologist, Portland's leading dizzy doc. I enter his office, certain he has an answer. Hope is hard. I've been carrying it in my pocket for months. The possibility of this doctor not having answers is inconceivable and crushing. After listening to me convey, for what feels like the 100th time, all my bizarre experiences and sensations, he orders 2 days of extensive testing at Legacy Hospital's vestibular lab. It's not going to be fun, I'll tell you this right now, but we may get some answers. I nod obligingly. I'm quick to tell a doctor he's right or she's helping me, even when I feel like I'm dying inside. I project all my absent father issues on male physicians. Maybe he'll think I'm so smart and so sweet that he'll go the extra mile to make sure I get better. He'll look forward to the day when he sees me out in the world succeeding and think, I helped her. He'll be proud of me. But he was right. 2 days of vestibular tests designed to put maximum stress on all the visual and auditory connections to one's inner balance are not fun. He was also right to use the conditional verb may, leaving room for no answers at all. Kim, you passed your tests with flying colors. Your vestibular system is working great. Ordinarily, this kind of daddy high five would projectile shoot glitter from my eyes, but instead I am deflated and in disbelief. So that's it? But what do I have? Are you saying nothing is wrong with me? Maybe I haven't conveyed how dire this is. Maybe I try too hard to look okay, to be pleasing. I can't go on like this. Does he think I'm making it all up? You may have cervicogenic vertigo. Cervic what? It takes me a moment to realize he's not talking about my vagina. I'll prescribe you 12 sessions with a great vestibular PT. She'll work on your neck, and you may feel some improvement. And if that doesn't work, we can start drug trials: benzos, anti seizure drugs, anti anxiety drugs. They all have side effects that you're not going to like, though. Contempt smolders inside me. I may feel some improvement. You don't even have a definitive diagnosis. I can barely hear him anymore as he rattles off drug names, possible complications, dependencies. He starts to read my face. I am no longer speaking, only shuddering. With an attempt to comfort me, he says, "A tincture of time." I stand up, the floor trampolines. He reaches out his hand, and my misinterpreting heart leaps towards it. A gesture of warmth and support delivered on a scribbled prescription pad for diazepam. The body heals itself, and doctors take the credit, he chuckles as I walk out the door. I hate his flippant remark and the kernel of truth it suggests. Time can be the ultimate healer, at least in the most broad sense of the healing, the kind of healing or post-traumatic growth that may not cure bodies but can sometimes heal spirits. A person becoming more virtuous, more brave, more connected because of illness or tragedy. But I don't want my spirit to grow. I want to be fixed. I wobble home thinking about his parting words. If this is true, are all treatments, protocols, and dollars spent along the way just buying time? Time is also the ultimate killer. What if time makes this worse? Not everyone has access to resources and support. Sometimes time destroys us. And that goes on.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's excuse me, it's indeterminate, and instead of trying to resolve that or tie it up in a bow, you just kind of leave us in that predicament, which I
Yeah.
think is a powerful place. We have to finish that story within
Mhm.
ourselves.
Mhm. It's a very true place too. It's I've been working with Unfixed Media now since 2019, and am constantly working with patients and their stories. And most of us don't have cures. It's interesting how the medical system is designed to, fix it's emergency care. We're really, really, really good at emergencies, and largely, a lot of people are walking around with things that can't be fixed. And there's not a lot of narrative around that in media. And so what it does, I think, for patients is it leaves us feeling isolated. And then when we read stories or we watch films that talk about that isolation and that unfixedness, the uncertainty, there's a settling that happens that's like, oh my God, like I said earlier, maybe I won't be healed, but there's a new emergent self that can still live her life within this.
Hmm.
One of my favorite people I've worked with over the years, we started in 29 doing a documentary, and his name is Dylan Shanahan. He wrote Liberation of Being, lives with ALS, very, very, very late stage. But even when I met him in 2019, he wasn't able to communicate with his mouth, only with his eyes. Young, beautiful gentleman, and helped him write his memoir a couple years ago. And he is quite a shining example of how that life force can continue to thrive and exist within an extremely compromised state. And
Well,
yeah.
that's well, you mentioned your films. Maybe we could end there since we're getting close to our time. But so you've made films that you screened at Harvard Medical School. You're doing films as part of your advocacy work,
Mhm.
um, and you're on advisory boards that that really are contributing to that advocacy. Do you think illness narratives like yours actually change how medicine is practiced, or is it mainly Is the
Mhm.
power of it mainly for patients to feel solidarity and, that nervous system reset that someone gets from reading your book? Is that for other people that are in your shoes, or is that actually something that you think doctors and other caregivers will
The
absorb and
goal
then change?
Yeah, the goal would be to get these in medical schools. I think patients seek this stuff out. Even with social media, they can find it now. So that's great. You guys can watch this, but to me, the real work is getting the films into medical schools, getting them into curriculums, getting them in front of physicians that are already practicing. All the episodes are 8 to 10 minutes long. It doesn't take long for a physician to really um, just grasp a sense of humanity within the voices that I feature in these stories. And I really stay away from, let's talk about what your treatments are and all of that. It's more of the deeper um, themes around hope and purpose and meaning. One of the episodes towards the end of the first docuseries asks the question, would you give up everything you've learned since your diagnosis in order to be healed? And it was, there was no right or wrong. I wasn't looking for some sort of, glitter rainbow from people. And it was a wonderful mixed bag, but a resounding no came from a
Hmm.
lot of people, including Dylan, this gentleman with ALS. Because he had gotten to the point where he felt like ALS had become his ultimate teacher, and he wouldn't want to take away those lessons. So I think that kind of level of humanity, when a physician can, in 10 minutes, they're just looking for bullets and ways to attack what is coming in at them. But if they can hold a little bit more of their story, um, I I think it just opens the potential for an additional kind of healing if they are unable to heal them with the magic bullet.
Well, I know from speaking with physicians, some of them are fighting the common enemy of the patient, which is the corporate bureaucracy.
Mm,
So it's not that they're unconvinced of the need for more healing. It's just that they're not given opportunities to spend that quality time or show anything that's not a billable hour, or you know, they just can't, within the system that they operate, perform that
yeah.
way. And that seems especially harmful in the case of chronic illness, because it's the contextual things that make it worse or even spark the onset of it. And
Mhm.
so it's more of the contextual human story that a doctor would need to be able to respond to, and yet the constraints of the 15-minute visit or whatever it is, or if they are running behind all day, they can't get their 40 patients in, they got to make them up because some admin is telling them they have to do that. I think
Mhm.
sometimes the culture and the environments, the corporate cultures that are created within hospitals work against that too.
Yeah, and I think to me, the answer there's a solution to that. They don't Okay, if 10 minutes is all they've got, have resources for your patients. Give them your time for those 10 minutes and then hand them a resource with a link to one of the Unvix docuseries videos, or for, my Dizzy doc. Hand me the pamphlet to the Vestibular Disorders Association that's literally in the same town, so I can connect with support groups and, additional physicians that are working within. I mean, have resources. We live in a world where there are so many resources, and I think maybe that's a lot of extra work for the doctor, but maybe there needs to be additional staff member that just gathers resources for those patients, because, yeah, a lot of that time, is just going to be taken up by gathering data and writing a prescription. But if they're sick, they're going to go home and they have got lots of time. I guarantee you they got lots of time. So give them
Mhm.
something to do with that time.
Mhm. Well, so tell me a little bit about Unfixed Media. And so you're telling other people's stories, or are these oral histories? Are they interviews? What would someone see in your films? Can they go
Yeah.
somewhere? to watch some of these?
They're all so there's a great channel called the Disorder Channel, and that was started actually during the pandemic by 2 gentlemen that were running a rare disease film festival on the East Coast, and then because the festivals had to be shut down, they started a channel, and it's accessible through Amazon Fire and Roku. But I also have everything for free on YouTube and on the Unfixed Media website. It originally began as a documentary, a feature documentary, but like I said, we started filming in 2019 and the pandemic happened. So was 3 subjects down and then we had to shut everything down. So I had 20 individuals that were already signed on, and I thought, let's just um, use smartphones and I'll send them equipment and see what we can get done in their living rooms and bedrooms. And it ended up being such a successful model for patient narratives because I found that they were actually even more comfortable than the ones that had the film crew in their living rooms with. Very vulnerable. And so we filmed for 2 years where they every month would answer a question I had, and then they were edited into a docuseries, a 2-year-long docuseries. And then that snowballed into a vestibular series through the Vestibular Disorders Association, and then another one through Solve ME, which was all about myalgic encephalomyelitis and long COVID. And then I did one through Harvard Medical School and Dr. Annie Brewster, that was on all mental health. So, and it just keeps every year I sort of respond to what organizations might feel like there's a need for this type of education. There are always willing ambassadors and patients to participate, and it's really a it's been an easy way to gather these stories, and I'm very picky about how they're edited, so they're beautifully done and staged as well as they possibly can, and ultimately someday I'm actually applied for a Guggenheim grant, and I'll find out next month if I got it, but I would like to go back to those original 20 subjects, or at least a smaller pool of those subjects, and finish the feature documentary a little bit like the 7 Up stories, the films that were done over a period of, God, I don't even 49 years, and see how these subjects are doing 7 years later, because chronic
Mhm,
illness is chronic. So how are they doing 7 years after our first interviews were? So, I'll
mhm,
be doing this for the rest of my life. It feels really satisfying to bring these stories into a little bit more of the general audience, but I'll tell you, it's an uphill battle to get people to watch it. As far as I think we have to find our niche populations, and medical schools would be a great place for that. But a lot of the times, as soon as somebody says, "Here's chronic illness," they're like, "Nope, I don't want to hear it.
yeah.
Sounds sad."
Mm,
And
mm,
the irony is that so many people, when they watch these, they feel uplifted. So they
mhm,
are stories of human resilience, mostly.
absolutely. Well, best of luck with your grant, and, we'll end with a plug for your memoir, Unfixed, which is available from Empress Editions, and I'll point everyone to, Kim, to your Substack, unfixed.substack.com. I'll put the links in the show notes. So that's the thing not named for today. I hope everyone will save the date for my next Substack Live on Friday, April 17th, 11 a.m. Eastern. I'll speak with Dr. Mara Gordon, a family physician in Philadelphia and the author of NPR's Real Talk with the Doc column. Her Substack, Your Doctor Friend, explores what actually happens in the exam room, how a patient's chief complaint about abdominal pain becomes a conversation about body shame, how chest pain turns out to be loneliness, how a 15-minute appointment is never really about just one thing. Mara's at work on a book about diet culture and medicine. And so, if today's conversation about what medicine looks like from the patient's side resonated with you, um, Mara's perspective from inside the exam room is the perfect counterpoint. You won't want to miss that. So, thanks everyone for tuning in to the Things Not Named. Thank you, Kimberly, for sharing your time and your book with us.
Thank you so
Until
much, Joshua.
take care, everyone, and until next time.
Bye.
Bye
Take
now.
care.
Bye now.